You know, we often think the story of a contract ends the moment it's signed, but really, what if that's just the beginning? Today, we're going to follow the journey of a promise, from the second the ink dries all the way to its final destination.
So imagine this. You've signed on the dotted line. A promise has been made. But then what? I mean, what really happens next? What are the actual rules for turning that piece of paper into a real-world result? Well, that's exactly what we're about to dig into.
All right, so our journey has 5 main stops. First, we're going to look at the heart of the contract, the promise itself. Then we'll figure out who are the key players responsible for it. After that, we'll get into the rules of the road, the when, where, and how. We'll also look at what happens when things get complicated, and finally, we'll see how a contract actually reaches its end.
Okay, first stop. A promise is a promise. This is the bedrock principle. Every single contract at its core is really just an obligation that needs to be fulfilled. Simple as that.
You know, in legal speak, performance is surprisingly straightforward. It means exactly what it sounds like. You got to fulfill your obligations. You have to do what you promised to do. It's all about holding up your end of the bargain. But here's the thing. Fulfilling that promise isn't always a one-way street. Think about it in 2 ways. You've got actual performance. That's easy. The job is done, the loan is repaid, the promise is complete. But what if you try to do your part and the other person says no? Well, that's called attempted performance. You showed up, you were ready and willing, and the law actually recognizes that you made the effort.
So a promise has to be performed. That brings up a pretty important question. Who, exactly, is on the hook to get it done?
Well, it's not always the person who signed the contract. I mean, sure, the promiser is the obvious choice, especially for personal skills, like if you hire an artist to paint a portrait. But other people can step in. An agent can handle general tasks. If the promiser passes away, their legal reps might take over, though they're usually only on the hook for the property they inherit. And hey, even a third person can do it, as long as the other party agrees. But things get really interesting when a whole group of people make a promise together.
Now, this is a really powerful rule. If a group makes a promise, the person they promised it to doesn't have the headache of trying to chase everyone down. Nope, they can pick any single person from that group and hold them responsible for the entire promise. It's then up to that one person to sort things out with the rest of their group.
Let's make this real. Imagine 3 people, X, Y, and Z, owe 6,000 rupees together. Z steps up and pays the whole thing. Now, normally, Z would just get 2,000 back from X and 2,000 from Y. But what if X can't pay his full share? Let's say he's insolvent. Well, the remaining partners have to pick up the slack. In this case, Y doesn't just owe his own 2,000, he also has to cover half of X's shortfall. And that's why Z can demand 2,500 rupees from Y alone.
Okay, so we've identified our players. Now we need to talk about the rules of the game. Because you see, fulfilling a promise isn't just about the what, it's about the when, the where, and just as important, the in what order.
So some promises are linked together, kind of like a chain reaction. The law calls these reciprocal promises. It's pure logic. You can't demand payment for a house that isn't built yet, right? Building the house has to happen before the payment is due. It's a simple, common-sense order of operation.
But life isn't always that straightforward. What happens when things go sideways? What happens when a promise, for whatever reason, becomes literally impossible to keep?
Okay, so there's a really crucial difference here, and it's all about timing. Initial impossibility means the promise was impossible from day one, like a contract to discover treasure using magic. It was never a real contract to begin with. But subsequent impossibility? That's different. That's when a perfectly valid contract gets derailed by some unforeseen event, like a new law that suddenly makes the whole thing illegal. The contract was valid, but it becomes void the moment it becomes impossible. Here's a classic example, even if it is a bit dramatic. A and B agree to get married, but before the wedding, something unexpected happens. A loses their mental capacity. The contract to marry becomes void. So why? It's because a fundamental condition for performing the contract, the ability to actually consent to the marriage, is just gone. This is a perfect, if sad, example of subsequent impossibility.
So, we've seen how promises are kept and how they can be broken by circumstances. This brings us to the final destination on our journey. How does a contract officially come to an end?
You know, we tend to think contracts just end when the job is done. And yeah, successful performance is the most common way, but it's only about half the story. As you can see, contracts can also end by mutual agreement, or because they become impossible, or when someone breaks the promise, or even through legal processes like bankruptcy.
So let's quickly break down these endings. Discharge by performance is that happy ending we all hope for, but parties can also just agree to walk away from it. We've already seen how impossibility can completely terminate a deal. And get this, contracts can also just expire if too much time passes. And finally, of course, there's breach of contract. If one person breaks their promise, the other is often freed from theirs.
If there's just one thing you remember from all this, let it be this. A contract doesn't just fade away into nothing. It has a formal life cycle. Whether it ends in success, by mutual agreement, or in failure, it needs an official, legally recognized conclusion.
And that brings our journey to a close. We've seen that what happens after you sign is every bit as critical as the agreement itself. So I'll leave you with this question. What is the one rule from this journey, whether it's about who performs, how they do it, or how it all ends, that can make all the difference for your next promise?